These are two energy breakthroughs from China that each set a genuine world. First one in nuclear fusion and one in a nuclear technology the United States walked away from more than 50 years ago. In this video, we're going to break down exactly what China achieved, how it actually works, how far the country still has to go, and why scientists and governments around the world can't stop watching. Stick around, because the second one might be even wilder than the first. Let's start with the machine that earned itself a nickname. In Hefei, in eastern China's Anhui province, there's a machine called the Experimental Advanced Superconducting Tokamak East for short. Almost nobody calls it that though. Most people just call it the artificial sun. And that nickname is doing a lot of work, because that's basically the goal: build a sun on Earth. It's operated by the Institute of Plasma Physics under the Chinese Academy of Sciences, and it has been running since 2006 as the world's first fully superconducting tokamak. So this isn't some experiment that popped up overnight. It's a machine with nearly 2 decades of history behind it, quietly grinding away at one of the hardest problems in all of science. So what is EAST actually trying to do? Recreate fusion, the exact reaction that powers the sun itself. And here's the thing most people get backwards. Fusion and the nuclear power we already use are opposites. Fusion combines light atomic nuclei together. Fission, the process inside today's nuclear plants, does the reverse. It splits heavy atoms apart. And to force those light nuclei to fuse, you need conditions that sound almost made up. Temperatures over 100 million degrees Celsius. At that point, you run into an obvious problem. No material on Earth can survive touching that kind of heat. So how do you hold it? You don't, really. You suspend it. The plasma is held in place using powerful magnetic fields, floating in the middle of the machine, never touching the walls. That's the whole challenge in one sentence. Get matter hotter than the core of the sun, then hold it steady in midair with magnets. Unlike solar and wind, fusion doesn't care about the weather or the time of day. And unlike fossil fuels, there's no combustion at all. So here's the moment that put EAST on screens around the world. On the 20th of January 2025, the machine held steady-state, high-confinement plasma for 1,066 seconds, just under 18 minutes. And it didn't squeak past the old record, it obliterated it. The previous world record was 403 seconds, and that mark had also been set by EAST itself back in 2023. So in 2 years, the same machine went from 400 seconds to over 1,000. But let me pump the brakes for a second, because this is exactly where these stories tend to get oversold, and I'd rather you walk away with the version that actually holds up. EAST did not power a city. It did not produce limitless energy. What it set was a plasma confinement duration record, holding that superheated plasma stable for longer than anyone ever had before. That's a real, brutally difficult milestone. But it's about control and endurance, not about generating electricity. And honestly, that distinction is the whole reason this achievement survives a fact check instead of falling apart the second someone pokes at it. So, if EAST proves you can hold the plasma, the obvious question is, when does someone actually turn that into power? And that's where the story walks right next door to a second machine. That machine is called the Burning Plasma Experimental Superconducting Tokamak, BEST for short. And its goal is genuinely historic. BEST is meant to be the first device ever to demonstrate fusion electricity generation, not just holding plasma for 18 minutes, but taking that reaction and producing actual power. That's the leap from science experiment to energy source. The leap the entire field has been chasing for decades. And the milestones have been landing one after another. On the 1st of October 2025, BEST installed its first major component, a piece called the Dewar Base. The scale alone tells you what kind of project this is. It weighs over 400 tons, measures about 18 meters across, and it's described as the largest vacuum component ever produced in China's fusion research field. And that's just the base. The full assembly involves around 6,000 tons of components, all fitting together with extreme precision. Then came the magnets, and the magnets are the heart of a machine like this, because they're what actually cage the plasma. On the 27th of June, 2026, 2 domestically developed superconducting magnets passed full load testing, and these are monsters. A single coil's weight jumped from 350 tons in the older design to 580 tons in the new one. Around that same time, in the summer of 2026, a 582-ton magnet was reported as the largest fusion magnet ever built anywhere on the planet. And here's the part that really matters strategically. Every piece of it was made in China, not imported, not assembled from foreign parts built from the ground up at home. Real quick, if your brain is already doing backflips over an 18-minute artificial sun, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button, because this channel lives for exactly this kind of stuff. And drop a comment telling me, fusion or thorium? Which one are you more excited about? Because we're getting to thorium in a minute. Okay, back to it. So what's the timeline from here? BEST is scheduled for completion by the end of 2027. And then comes the big one, the target of demonstrating net fusion power gain and generating the first electricity from fusion, set for around 2030. Chinese scientists have a poetic name for that goal. They call it lighting humanity's first nuclear fusion-powered lamp. And even beyond BEST, there's a larger machine still on the drawing board, the China Fusion Engineering Test Reactor, designed to push the technology further still. Now, you might be wondering how serious China really is about all this, versus how much is just big announcements. Here's your answer. The Chinese Communist Party named fusion energy a priority in its 15th five-year plan, which runs from 2026 to 2030. And it didn't bury it in the fine print, it put fusion right alongside artificial intelligence, quantum technology, and deep-sea and Arctic exploration, as one of the country's frontier technology areas. That's the top shelf of national priorities. And the money backs up the words. According to estimates from the Special Competitive Studies Project, a Washington-based technology policy think tank, Beijing invested at least $6.5 billion in commercial fusion-related projects between 2023 and September 2025. I'll be straight with you, that's a think tank estimate, not an official government number. But even as an estimate, it shows you the size of the bet. The people running the project sound confident too. BEST's chief engineer, Song Yuntao, said it flat out at a ceremony marking the start of final assembly. We have fully mastered the core technologies, both scientifically and technically. And I love that this comes from inside the program. Not everyone is spiking the football yet. When those giant magnets passed testing in June 2026, a project engineer cautioned that the tests were only 80% of the journey. The last stretch, he explained, is proving long-term stability over time. That's a reality check straight from the people doing the work. Which brings me to the framing that matters most in this whole story. China is leading here, but it's leading a race, not standing alone at the finish line. In Massachusetts, a machine called Spark, built by a company called Commonwealth Fusion Systems, is chasing that exact same net energy gain milestone on a comparable timeline. China is also a contributor to ITER, the roughly €20 billion international fusion project in France. So the honest picture isn't China cracked fusion while everyone else slept. It's that China is at the very front of a fiercely competitive global field. And remember, fusion has a long, humbling history of ambitious timelines that slipped. A 2027 completion and a 2030 electricity demo are targets. They are not guarantees. Okay, that's story one. Now let's get into the second breakthrough, and in some ways this one is even stranger, because it takes a technology the world basically gave up on and drags it back to life. Out in Wuwei, in Gansu province, right on the edge of the Gobi Desert, there's a reactor called TMSR, LF1. It's a 2-megawatt thermal experimental thorium molten salt reactor, built by the Shanghai Institute of Applied Physics. And here's the jaw-dropper. It is the first operational molten salt reactor anywhere in the world since the United States shut down its Oak Ridge program back in 1969. Let that sink in. This is a technology America pioneered, then abandoned over half a century ago, and China revived it using declassified American research. And the design is nothing like the reactors you picture in your head. In a normal reactor, the fuel sits in solid rods. In this one, the thorium and uranium fuel is dissolved directly into molten fluoride salt. And that salt pulls double duty, it carries the fuel, and it acts as the coolant, all at once. On top of that, it has a safety feature that's almost beautiful in how simple it is: a frozen salt plug. If the reactor overheats or loses power, that plug melts, the fuel drains into a cooling tank, and the whole reaction shuts itself down automatically. No meltdown, no human intervention, no backup power required. and it produces less long-lived waste than conventional uranium reactors. Now, this little reactor has pulled off two separate world firsts, and both deserve a second. The first was announced on the 8th of April, 2025, at a closed meeting of the Chinese Academy of Sciences. Scientists revealed they'd reloaded fresh fuel into the reactor while it was still running. Refueling during operation had simply never been done before in a reactor like this. Normally, you have to shut the entire thing down. Being able to top up the fuel while it keeps generating heat is a huge step toward reactors that just keep going. The second world first came in early November, 2025. The reactor converted thorium-232 into fissile uranium-233, the first time that conversion has ever been demonstrated inside an operating molten salt reactor. In plain English, they proved that thorium, which you can't just use as reactor fuel on its own, can actually be turned into usable nuclear fuel inside this machine. The Institute's deputy director, Li Qingwan, described it as the first time international experimental data had been obtained after thorium was introduced into a molten salt reactor, making this the only operating molten salt reactor in the world to have successfully incorporated thorium fuel. And look at how fast this all came together, because the pace is genuinely part of the story. Construction began in September 2018. The reactor hit criticality, the point where you get a self-sustaining chain reaction, on the 11th of October 2023, full power in June 2024. Refueling during operation in April 2025. Thorium to uranium conversion that November. From breaking ground to two world firsts in roughly 7 years. And they are clearly not stopping at 2 megawatts. A bigger demonstration reactor near Wuwei, rated at 10 megawatts electric and 60 megawatts thermal, built to generate both electricity and hydrogen, is targeted for around 2029 to 2030. Beyond that, a 100 megawatt electric demonstration is targeted by 2035. And there's a strategic reason for the whole push. Thorium is abundant in China. You'll sometimes hear that its reserves could power the country for thousands of years. I'd treat that specific figure as promotional, but the core point, that thorium is plentiful there, is very real, and it's a big part of why China is chasing this path so hard. The chief scientist on the thorium project, Xu Hongjie, summed up the moment perfectly. We are now at the frontier of global nuclear innovation. Now zoom out for a second, because neither of these reactors exists in a vacuum. They're happening inside a much bigger energy transformation. In 2025, China's total power capacity hit 3,890 gigawatts, and for the first time in history, its combined wind and solar capacity outranked coal. Solar rose 35% to around 1,200 gigawatts. Wind rose 23% to around 640 gigawatts. China also dominates the supply chain, producing roughly 90% of the world's solar polysilicon, wafers, and cells, and about 85% of global solar modules. Clean energy investment contributed an estimated 15.4 trillion yuan to China's economy in 2025, about 11.4% of its entire GDP. And in 2026, China's total power generation is projected to break 10,000 terawatt hours for the first time, with renewables making up roughly 39% of it. So, fusion and thorium aren't lonely science projects. They're the sharp edge of a country rebuilding its entire energy system at once. So, let's bring it home to where we started. 2 breakthroughs, 2 genuine world firsts. In fusion, a machine that held plasma stable for a record 1,066 seconds, and a successor built to generate the first ever electricity from fusion by around 2030. And in nuclear, a revived thorium reactor that refueled itself while running, and that turned thorium into usable fuel, something no other operating reactor on Earth has done. Here's the honest takeaway I want to leave you with. These are real achievements, verified by China's own scientific institutions and reported all over the world. But they're also works in progress, chasing targets that could still slip in a race where other countries are running just as hard. So, what's actually shocking here isn't that China finished the job, because it hasn't. What's shocking is how fast, and on how many fronts at once, it's trying to. And the next few years will tell the tale. Watch 2027, when BEST is supposed to be complete. Watch 2030 for that first fusion-powered lamp and that bigger thorium demonstrator. Those dates decide whether this is the future of energy or just chapter 1 of a much longer story. So now I want to hear from you. Do you think China lights that first fusion lamp by 2030, or does the timeline slip like it always has before? Drop your prediction in the comments, because I read them. If this video taught you something, hit like so it reaches more curious people, and subscribe so you don't miss the moment one of these targets actually gets hit, because when it does, we'll break it down right here. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.